where I get on here and talk at you about all the shit that's going on in the world at the moment. So, welcome to this morning's SitRep. It is the 5th of May 2022. We've just come past Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. That's all done with now. No exciting announcements, really, as far as Star Wars is concerned, but many exciting announcements as far as the world is concerned. So this is where I go through stories that I have seen on the interwebs and in other sources that I have accessed over the past 24 hours, and I chat about what I think about these things. Kind of looking at trends, where the world's going, what's happening at the moment, and what we can do to best prepare ourselves for an uncertain future that we appear to be heading towards very rapidly. And usually from the perspective of the Australian mindset, i.e. what us Aussies are going to do. Because there's plenty of prepper stuff that's American-based and some that's UK-based, but not a bunch that's Australia-based. There is a few of us out there, but just going to add my voice to it. So, Thursday, 5th of May, here we go. Let's start off with my favorite subject, food and food shortages. If you've ever listened to me before, you know that this is something that disturbs me greatly and that I think we should all worry about, and that I think we should all actively move towards securing our own food system. So whether that be just storing up extra food in your own house, which is a great idea, growing your own food, which is also a great idea, hunting your own food, which I think is also a great idea, but in whatever way that you can, trying to secure your own food system so you're not necessarily reliant on the supermarkets or maybe even in the future the government. Perish the thought that we ever have to actually rely on our government to feed us. Okay, so the first news story that's coming out is from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland faces loss of 1 million sheep and cattle. What's that due to? Is it some new disease like we saw with Japanese encephalitis in the Australian pigs? Is it some sort of bird flu like we saw throughout the US and Canada and parts of Europe? No, it's to meet climate targets. So instead of, maybe thinking about any other number of things that we could do, we're going to actually attack our food system in order to get that climate target that we're reaching for. Man, this just does my head in. Every day, there's some new story that comes out that I'm just like, wow, how backwards can we get? Every day we get a little bit more backwards. So this is one, I think this is a massive problem. Maybe this will actually help us reach those climate targets because we're taking the, methane producing cows out of the equation. But, we'll probably, if we keep going down this path, we'll probably have a fair amount of humans who will starve to death in the next 10 years. So that'll cut down the carbon usage. It's my dog barking in the backyard. I wonder why. Okay. More fires in more food processing plants. So today we have a food processing plant in Northwest Fresno in California. Fire in that. And we have one in London, in an industrial bakery in London. So that's quite interesting. Another couple of food processing plants that have caught fire mysteriously. This is, by the way, even mentioning this is now getting you labeled as a conspiracy theorist. So mainstream media has cottoned on that there are these things happening, that we're seeing fires happen, and anyone that talks about it in any way that links them together is a conspiracy theorist. So I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on right now and talk about fires. All right, what else is happening in the food system in the US? US winter wheat crop now at multi-decadal worst condition. So since 1989, they're looking at the worst wheat. What is going on with this dog in the backyard? Anyway, can't do anything about that right now. So worst wheat crop outlook since 1989. On top of that as well, here's another little story that the delay that they're having because of weather conditions, mainly due to rain, but there's a number of weather conditions that they're getting throughout the US at the moment. Drought, rain, snow in some parts. It's delaying the planting season, so that's quite important. I think you would agree that you need to put certain plants in the ground at certain times. Corn being one of the biggest crops grown in the US. So planting delays are mounting in some key production states. There's actually a little map that came up with these states. This was who put this up? I can't remember where it was put up, but anyway, the planting delays in this could, and I'll quote, impact yield potential. So planting delays are mounting in some key production states. I suspect we will get them planted, but in less than ideal conditions that impacts yield potential. So they're going to get these plants in the ground. It's not going to be the right conditions for them to go on the ground. It's going to be a shorter growing season. So there's a number of factors there that mean that they're not going to get the crop that they think they're going to get, or that they usually get. And yet another thing. I know I talk about almost a different thing to do with the food system every day, and this is just another one: delays in planting. And then kind of like attached to this, not quite about food, but about cost of living. UK Environment Secretary George Eustace has suggested the British public can survive the sharpest consumer price increase since 2011 by buying value brands. So he's basically come out and said, hey, just buy cheap. You'll be fine. Just buy cheaper stuff. Yeah, sure. I mean, the reason I'm putting this up is obviously food prices gone up everywhere in the world, or not everywhere in the world, but in a lot of parts of the world, food prices have gone up and are continuing to rise. And what I am observing is the messaging from our government isn't people start gardening, hey, secure your own food system. Let's all work together to do this. It's tighten your belts, buy cheaper stuff. It's similar to what came out in the US, where they were talking about electricity prices going through the roof. Gas prices going through the roof. And one of their politicians came out and said, well, people should just buy Tesla. Problem solved, right? It's this detachment from the ordinary man, that the average person on the ground who is feeling the effects of this is being told by people who do not feel the effects of this, not in reality. And this has been happening for a long, long time. If you look back historically, the reason that this worries me is that historically, this is one of those markers that when we see the ruling class start to detach themselves from the working class or from the average person, the more distance that becomes between those two people, the more fractious the society becomes. And it's kind of one of those indicators that show us that a civilization is in decline, which I think we are. Our civilization is in decline. So yeah, just buy the cheaper brands. You'll be right. All right, let's go around the world now. Let's talk about the fall of Pax Americana. I'm always on the lookout for things that show that the US is starting to get onto shaky ground. I mean, there's many of them, and there's certainly a lot over the past 24 hours. One was I was talking to somebody on the Instagrams who I quote this person quite a bit. They have their finger on the pulse, I believe, and yesterday, they were showing me some stories about the Russian deputy PM went around in February 2022 and visited Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. So if you don't know, these are socialist, communist countries. I'm not sure. Is Venezuela, I think they're socialist. I don't think you'd classify them communist. Cuba's definitely communist, though. So went around and visited these countries, putting in some ties there. There's been some stuff going on in and around Cuba. If you don't know your history around Cuba and what it means to the US, go just type into your search engine Cuban Missile Crisis and read about that. It was a point in our history where we were probably arguably the closest point to mutually assured destruction in the Cold War. we came the closest to nukes being launched. It was between Russia and the US, but Russia pretty much pre-positioned missiles in Cuba. And because of that, one of the fallouts from that little fracas, from that little tension building event, is that no country now wants any missiles or the ability to put missiles anywhere within its country or anywhere where it could kind of strike its country. So, i.e., Russia doesn't want missiles sitting on its front doorstep that could strike Moscow. So if they're looking at someone like Ukraine possibly joining NATO, then they're going to go, no, we don't want that. And they're probably going to move in on Ukraine. Well, that's what's actually happened. So that's part of the context of what's happening in the world right now, in case you don't know. US, you can track planes and stuff like that. The US is monitoring Cuba. Like they are flying they're monitoring planes over Cuba quite intensively at the moment. So that's got some people like my friend here and myself curious. What's going on? This is worth keeping an eye on. That Cuban missile crisis, we don't want part 2 of that, but could be that. Also, Venezuela. So there was a meeting between the Iranian oil minister and their Venezuelan counterpart. So for those who don't know, Venezuela is one of the world's largest oil producers. They have a glut of oil. So that's Venezuela, possibly because of mismanagement of their government, possibly should have just utterly collapsed. It was in a state of collapse a couple of years ago, and it's kind of held on, I believe at least, through having just so much oil that they can sell off. So even though they've got sanctions up the wazoo on Venezuela, they still sell it. And this is what I was talking about, yesterday and the day before and the day before that, with these Russian sanctions. I'm like, people are still going to buy this stuff. When I was in Venezuela, their dollar had utterly collapsed. So there was no point in even having their money there. People were using US dollars. US dollars were sought after, but even they were starting to wane out. What was actually on the rise there was euros. And I said, well, that's interesting. Why are euros on the rise in Venezuela? And they said, well, the US has put a sanction on Venezuelan oil, so we can't sell it in US dollars anymore, but people are shipping over ships filled with euros and saying, look, offload those euros, unload your oil, problem solved. Let's do that. So there was euros flowing in there. So somebody in Europe was doing it. It wasn't a legit market, but it was big. Anyway, so yesterday, Iran and Venezuela are doing some sort of deal about oil. And oddly, they're shaking hands at the end of it in the press conference. The Iranian minister came out and said, down with the US, smiling and laughing. And then obviously the counterpart, the Venezuelan counterpart, said, "Don't say that. Don't say that on camera." But yeah, once again, it's another sign of I keep talking about this. These nations that are, kind of loosely aligned, who are not pro-Western. They are they're becoming more and more anti-Western because more sanctions are putting upon them. That they're being forced into a very strong alliance now with the other countries that are also in the same situation. So the sanction bloc might be a good way to start calling it. But yeah, we're seeing ties like this, and then somebody overtly sort of saying like, down with the US. It's yet another blow to the petrodollar. We're seeing countries starting to forget about this whole petrodollar thing, deal their own petrol in their own currencies or in their own ways with their own people. Also in the US, this whole Supreme Court leak that's come out, pro-choice, pro-life clashes, seeing thousands of rioters in the streets, some pretty full-on footage if you want to go look it up, what's happening in Los Angeles. A lot of protesters in and around the Capitol too. In Washington, they've got big fences up. I'm not espousing any sort of conspiracy theory. I just thought it's very interesting that a week before this information was released, they happened to put fences up around the Capitol and the Capitol buildings. Shocking. Who knew? Who knew? Very interesting timing for that to be released as well. But that's a whole nother conspiracy theory, and I'm not putting the tinfoil hat on this morning yet. But we're seeing a lot of clashes there. So again, this is more fractious behavior that's happening within the US. Getting quite G'd up there. Again, it's the Pax Americana in its what would you call it? Autumnal, or maybe even coming into winter. It is in a state of disarray. I'll put it that way. But it's not the only riot that's going on in the world. There are many, many riots, and the latest one that I've caught on to, like there's still ones that are going on in places like Sri Lanka, and I think Peru's still having some troubles there, but many parts of the world, Israel still having them. Armenia has joined that list now. Dozens arrested as Yerevan protests demand PM Pashinyan's, I'm going to go with Pashinyan's, PM Pashinyan's resignation. So the Armenian people are up in arms wanting to boot their PM out. Yet another sort of example of rioting, and I keep talking about this rioting is going to continue going. We're going to see more of this kind of behavior in the not too distant future. All right, let's switch gears up into Europe now. What's going on in Europe, in the EU? As I keep saying, the EU is not the united front that we think. So Hungary's been the big one. Top Kiev official has come out and claimed Hungary was actually informed of the Russian attack on Ukraine in advance, and wants Ukraine territory. So they were saying that Hungary openly talks about its cooperation with Russia. They're basically starting to paint the picture now. This is the global or nationalist version of cancel culture, where they're saying, hey, you're not on our side, so you must be with the bad guys. And they're really starting to paint the picture of how Hungary is not on the side of the West. On the EU side, they're on the Russian side. They're on the bad side, because Hungary came out and said, look, we're going to buy oil from Russia. And there's not much you can do about that. Tied in with this, there's a few things that are tied in with this, but the EU has announced or the European Commission has proposed its latest package, which I think is number 6 of sanctions version 6 against Moscow. But they're getting a little bit of pushback from it. They're going to need everyone to sign off on it. And obviously Hungary's saying no, Slovakia's saying no. Hungary gets about 60% of its oil from Russia. Slovakia gets something like 95, I think it is, 96% of its oil from Russia. So unless there's some sort of, plan in place to secure that energy in some other way, then they're probably not going to vote yes on these sanctions. And they need everyone to vote yes on these sanctions if they want to pass them. So again, coming back, they're starting to paint Hungary as the bad guys. And I think it's, because they want to put pressure on them and say, look, you need to sign these. We don't want you to be on the wrong side of history here. You don't want that, do you? It's a very kind of interesting situation that's going on there within the EU. China actually has a habit of doing this, of coming out on social media and just sticking the dagger in and then walking off and not saying anything about it. They did it with Australia. I don't know if you remember this, but they posted a picture of a Australian soldier with a knife to an Afghan child's neck. And it was a pretty provocative image. There was no real reason for them to do it apart from the usual tit for tat stuff that was going on between our governments. But they have a habit of doing this, of just like, there's a little bit of fire there. Boom, here's some petrol. And then they just walk off and go like, we weren't doing anything. No, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, this is the latest one. They've come out and posted a little reminder about NATO coming out in 1990 and putting a non-expansion memorandum on. So they've come out. NATO's in 1990. There's many different versions of this over the years too. But in 1990, they said, "Hey, we're not going to move any more east. That's it. We're done." And obviously, quite progressively and recently, quite rapidly, they have been moving east. So China just came out and said, "Hey, you're all liars. Look, just a reminder." And it's got little pictures. Here's what NATO looked like in 1990. Here's what NATO looks like now. Mic drop. See you later. Obviously, this is not only a symptom of increasing tension between East and West, but this is another inflammatory spark, I guess, into the powder keg that's going on at the moment. China has been stepping up their rhetoric about anti kind of Westernism generally over the past 3 weeks. I mean, they've always got it, but over the past 3 weeks, it's been a bit more marked where you've been going, oh, okay. And for me, I've been looking at it and going, I think they're paving the way for this whole Taiwan thing to come in. And speaking about NATO expansion, Ukraine has come out, or their deputy PM has come out and said, look, Ukraine's not abandoned the idea of joining NATO. That's still on the table as far as we're concerned. We still want it. And and I'll quote, Sweden and Finland will become NATO members as soon as possible. But I can tell you for sure that if these countries waited another 15 years for their membership decision, they too would be in a state of war. So it's basically saying, we're in this situation because NATO dragged its feet in letting us in. So let's hurry it up. Let's get us into NATO now. Obviously, that's going to have a lot of effects. And NATO at the moment is a bit like, Ukraine, I don't know. If we let you join now, then we're kind of at World War III. So it's very beneficial for Ukraine to join NATO. It's not super beneficial for NATO to join Ukraine, to have Ukraine in their fold right now, unless they really want World War III. So I don't know, watch that space. But also the fact that we're going to get an announcement, allegedly, in 7 days, is what they said, on the 12th, from Finland, that they will be joining NATO. And then possibly Sweden could be following suit in the not too distant future after that. That's going to kind of exacerbate this situation with Ukraine wanting to join NATO. It's either going to inflame Ukraine saying, like, let us in now, or it's going to make it more likely that NATO will go, okay, well, while we're gobbling up countries into our side of the map, let's just chuck Ukraine in there as well. Let's just make this official. As a counter to that, I don't know if it was a counter to that. I don't actually have this story, but I did read that Putin came out and said any NATO or UN vehicle of any sort seen in the Ukraine will be assumed to be carrying weapons and will be a valid target. So yeah, tensions, hey? Tensions. I've got something about tensions. Here it is. General Miley, who's one of those US generals, chest full of gongs, has warned Congress that the chances of war among great powers is increasing, not decreasing. And I'm just putting this one in, not because this is like a revelation or something, because this is actually the exact thing that has been said. I remember this almost verbatim, this story 3 weeks ago or thereabouts. It's just that it's getting said again, and then it needs to be stated again. That the bleeding fucking obvious needs to be stated to Congress again. Like, hey, we're increasing tensions here. Things are getting worse. Nuclear powers are actually getting more tense, not less, right now. The chance of us going to war, and a major war, are becoming more and more likely every single day at the moment. So you got generals coming out and openly speaking about that to Congress. And on top of that, Seoul has come out. So over in the Korean Peninsula now, Seoul's come out and said North Korea has launched another ballistic missile. They're up to, I think, 14 now this year. They said, yep, they've launched another one. It went out into the ocean as they fire them out to the ocean there. And this was actually backed up by Japan. Japan said, yep, this is happening. And then Japan's PM came out and said that this cannot be tolerated, that something needs to be done here. And we've got a couple of dignitaries from around the world, I think Italian, British, maybe someone else, are about to go into Japan. So I think this will be a talking point for them in that area as well. And when we're looking at the bigger picture here, UK ministers have been talking about how NATO needs to get more involved in this area of the world. So, again, we're seeing the tensions. We're seeing these multifaceted, different conflicts and tensions that are rising around the world, and how these strings are starting to be tied together for something that might be a lot bigger in the not too distant future. So something we need to think about as individuals and start to prepare for. What happens if the conflicts that we're seeing start to increase and start to become something more akin to a war of multiple fronts around the world, i.e. a world war? Dare I say it? And how best to prepare ourselves for that. More of the same. What we're looking at, just exacerbated a lot more. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is some supply chain stuff and some financial stuff. Just a little bit of financial stuff, nothing too heavy this morning. I'm just going to touch on this. Cuba, obviously, it's been sanctioned by the US. What they've actually found is that at least, they're saying 100,000 Cubans are now using Bitcoin in response to US sanctions. So I'm always just interested in this sort of stuff. I'm interested to see what happens when people get sanctioned by the almighty powers that be, and where do they turn to. So Bitcoin is one of or cryptocurrency in general seems to be one of the places that people are turning, which is interesting to look at. But again, this is probably, I should have maybe filed this one under the FALL of PAX Americana section, where we're seeing, yet another thing where people are going, well, okay, if you're going to do this, US has had this homogeny on the world. They've gone, yep, our dollar is the reserve dollar. It's a reserve currency. You want to do anything in this world, you do it through us, and we're going to punish you if you don't do what we say. And now what we're seeing very rapidly is a lot of countries going, we're not going to do what you say. And America going, we're going to punish you. And they go, okay, punish us, but we're not going to do what you say, and we're going to find an alternative, whatever that is. So that's what we're seeing across the board in many, many different fields at the moment. All these alternatives coming up to the system that we have had. And as I like to say, we are actually currently sitting in the tumultuous turning of an economic system. I believe that in 50 years' time, right now, this period will be talked about in history books, probably even 5 years' time. But people will be looking at this going like, and then these factors all aligned, and we had a changeover in our money system, and it was all Putin's fault. Oh, maybe not. Maybe they won't say that. Depends who wins, I guess. All right, last one's warning. An estimated 20% of all container ships worldwide, according to Beijing's draconian COVID lockdowns and the conflict in Ukraine as key factors. Yes, those things are key factors, but there are a lot of other factors, because this system wasn't exactly fine and dandy before Beijing lockdown, and it wasn't fine and dandy before the Ukraine crisis. There was definite problems and there was definite backlogs before either of those two things happened. I think those two things are a convenient scapegoat. They're an easy way to blame, to lump all the pain on it. But in reality, I think there is a number of issues going on here where our supply chain system has been in turmoil for a little while, and it's been showing signs of wear and tear and kind of bulging at the seams, that it's not going to quite work. And then we've had these two big things lump in on top of it, and it's blown it out. So I've said this before about the Beijing port, that this is a huge problem. This is the biggest port in the world, and it currently has 1 month backlog. But that 1 month backlog, that's just of ships, is the 1 month backlog. That actually stretches out, and that will mean, even if it got cleared today, that would mean that we'd still have supply chain issues until the end of the year. But it's not going to get cleared today, and it's not going to get cleared tomorrow. So we're going to see a lot more problems with this supply chain. My recommendation is for this, in the prepping sense, if there are things that you are sitting on that you're thinking about getting, now might be the time, if you can get it, to go and get it now, because the ability to get things, especially things from overseas, may be curtailed significantly in the future. As I always say, I don't have a fucking magic ball or anything, crystal ball. I can't see the future. Things could turn out awesome tomorrow. I don't know, but things may not. And two factors that I think should be pushing you towards making some purchases of key things that are going to benefit your life are, one, these supply chain breakdowns, and two, inflation. So, if you were thinking about buying, say, a power generator, that power generator will probably, I can't guarantee it, but will probably cost more in 6 months. The equivalent will cost more in 6 months. That's if you can get it. A lot of these things are coming out of China, so who knows? All right, that wraps it up for today. That's all I'm going to talk about. If you missed out last night, there was a good chat. I got on there for a good 5 minutes with the Sydney Freedom community. We were talking about the Free at the Sea event that's coming up on Saturday, that I'll be there talking. I'll be there with Lauren, that Insta chick, chatting about all this sort of stuff, about how to help secure your life, help be more self-reliant, build communities around that kind of idea, and to just secure our futures a little bit more, bring that power back to us and that responsibility back to us to look after ourselves. So if any of that interests you, then feel free to come down to Bondi in Sydney, Australia, 1 p.m. this Saturday. I don't know what time I'll be talking, but I'll probably be having chat at some stage there and be floating around there if you want to catch up and talk. But that is it for today. So thanks very much for tuning in, for watching. I really appreciate it. Everyone who gets their eyeballs on these reports, because I'm putting this stuff out. I'm doing this anyway myself, so I might as well put it out there, and hopefully it's somewhat beneficial to you. The more people that we can get prepared, the better off we're all going to be. So keep prepping, guys. Keep storing up, get in the garden if you can, get that garden started. I think that's a super important thing to do at this time. And apart from that, see you guys next time. Semper Paratus.